So, in previous segments of Stopping Socialism TV, we've painted Joe Biden as this person that's trying to usher in the Great Reset. But a recent move, the executive order, he created the Made in America office. So that sounds a little Trumpian and not necessarily the Great Reset. But we're going to dive into that in the Stopping Socialism TV segment. But before we do, I always have been making a routine out of saying this, but we need your help to get our content out there. I've said before that Google, YouTube, Facebook, they're not doing us any favors. Now, not only are they not doing us any favors, but they're chopping off our legs when it comes to trying to get our content out there. So it's more important than ever for you to hit that like button, hit that share button, leave a comment. Anything you could do to help us out would be greatly appreciated. So, Justin, Made in America office, executive order by Joe Biden. This seems, just in its face, like not necessarily a terrible thing. What's going on here?
Yeah, it's pretty interesting how when you read about Joe Biden's Made in America campaign and what he wants to do, I actually agree with a lot of it. The main part of the proposal here that Joe Biden is pushing forward is he wants the federal government to spend more of its money on when they do contracts for various things. It could be something as simple as just who your paper provider is, right? Or who your cleaning service is, or where you, buy various things online or whatever. The federal government spends hundreds of billions of dollars every single year. Obviously, they spend trillions of dollars in the budget in total, but they spend hundreds of billions of dollars just on contracts alone. And what Joe Biden wants to do is say, look, if we're going to spend all this money, let's make sure that it's going to as many American businesses, truly American businesses with American workers, as we possibly can. So he issued this Made in America executive order where he's instructing the federal government to pursue this course of action all across the board. And part of that is he wants to create this Made in America office. And this Made in America office is going to make sure that the other federal agencies are only buying from Americans whenever possible. And if there's a really good reason for not doing it, then they have to apply for a waiver so that they can buy from some, foreign-owned business or something like that, okay?
Sure.
So it seems pretty straightforward. Seems like not something that a lot of people would be opposed to on the right or left, actually. Sounds like something that Donald Trump would come up with.
Right.
Yeah, so sounds great. But
there's a catch. There's a catch coming.
There's always a catch. When you actually start reading the fine print, you start realizing that they're not just going to use this office, this Made in America office, to buy American products. They're going to buy certain kinds of American products and certain kinds of services and from certain kinds of American businesses. It's not just, well, let's just make sure that our paper provider is, American with American workers. It's let's make sure our paper provider is American and that they do a whole bunch of other things that kind of fall in line with left-wing ideology.
Right.
So the sort of tip-off for this was when I was reading the official statement issued by the White House. At the very end of the official statement was this line that they threw in there, which is pretty amazing. They didn't have to put this in here, but it really was the thing that really started to get me digging on this. In the official statement, it says that President Biden's Made in America executive order, quote, is deeply intertwined with the president's commitment to invest in American manufacturing, including clean energy and critical supply chains, to grow good-paying union jobs and to advance racial equity, not equality under the law, but racial equity in outcomes. Now, on the surface, if you just read that quickly, you may not think much of that. But actually, if you break it down, what is he trying to say? What are they actually saying here? They're saying this new office is going to make sure that federal agencies are buying from businesses using hundreds of billions of dollars, the full weight and power of the federal government, all the money that they're spending and printing in order to make all this stuff happen, to invest in clean energy. Okay, that's code for, windmills and solar panels and electric cars and companies that that use those things instead of using, say, a gasoline powered car, a diesel truck, etc. Right? That means that you're going to favor some businesses over other businesses, not just businesses that are actually doing solar panels, producing solar panels and selling them, but also businesses that just refuse to use them for their form of energy, for example. That's how you could interpret that. And critical supply chains, which is so vague it could mean anything, to grow good paying, that could mean, $15 minimum wage, $20 minimum wage, whatever it is this week. Good paying jobs, union jobs, it says. Okay, well, we all know what that means, union jobs. So companies that don't have union employees are going to be put at the back of the line, and companies that may produce worse services or may cost more money for the federal government, but they have union workers, they're going to be put at the front of the line, right? And then, of course, to advance racial equity. Well, what does that mean? You're going to use the federal government's spending power when you're buying from your paper supplier to advance racial equity? What does that mean? What it means is you're going to try to use that money, tie strings of that money to try to coerce businesses to, make sure that you have the right ratio of Hispanics to Asians, because we need to make sure that we have racial equity in outcomes, regardless of whether or not that makes any sense, regardless of whether those are the best employees you can find in your particular area for your particular specialty. Why we're even putting race into the equation is a problem just in and of itself, of course, because anytime you start favoring one race over another race, you're engaging in racism. That's the very definition of racism. And yet that's essentially what this is saying, right? Yeah. And so obviously it's very vaguely worded, and this is just the official statement part of it. If you dig into the executive order, there's even more vague language that could be interpreted in all sorts of different ways. But the bottom line is this office is going to be used to pursue the other agendas that Biden has as well, not just the things that, not just buying American. It's not just about that. It's about all these other things too.
Well, and the thing that kind of got my attention on this is, like in all of our conversations about the Great Reset and ESG standards, environmental, societal, and governance standards, like this just seems like that, right? I mean, it's just like we need to prioritize businesses that have a higher social credit score when it comes to worrying about how many, women make up the boardroom and whether or not the supply chains are taking into account water pollution and all of this stuff. So like, is this specifically tied to the Great Reset, or is it just kind of overlapping principles when it comes to the Biden administration?
So for those of you who haven't listened to the things we've done before on ESG standards, on environmental, social, and governance standards, go back.
Yeah, number one, how dare you?
Yeah, exactly. You got to watch all of our videos. Go back and watch those videos where we're talking. It's anything where we talk about the Great Reset, any video where that's the primary topic. We go into ESG standards. It's really important to understand that. Essentially, ESG standards it's a metric. It's a way of measuring businesses that doesn't just look at how profitable you are or how good your products and services are or how pleased your customers are, but a whole bunch of other things too, like racial equity and union workers and all kinds of other things, right? How many women do you have on your board of directors? These are the kinds of things that they include in all of these other metrics. And some of those metrics are actually not necessarily bad things. Some of them are really good things. Like, for example, some of those metrics are things like, do you have any child labor in your supply chain, right? Like, obviously, no one is in favor of, or shouldn't be in favor of child labor. So that's a good thing. But when you're talking about reducing your CO2 emissions, or you're talking about, having enough of your energy coming from solar panels, or having, union workers, when that doesn't always make sense to have union workers, those things are not good. And yet that's all part of this ESG network, this ESG system, this framework that the left wants to use to evaluate businesses. Well, how does this fit in with the Joe Biden executive order? How exactly can a Made in America office, and let's just stop for a minute and think about Made in America office, MAO, the MAO office.
Right.
Okay. How would the MAO agency in the federal government, which is just incredible that they didn't realize that, but
Like-
how does the MAO agency determine that XYZ business is providing good paying jobs, or does have enough union workers, or is advancing racial equity? How do they do that? They just make a judgment call. They just pull up their website and say, yeah, you know what? I think they've got union workers. No, they've got to have some kind of metric, some framework for measuring businesses across the board, or else how else can you possibly do that? So really what this is using the power of the federal government to force businesses into this system that aren't already into it. Many businesses already are doing these ESG standards anyway, but it's reinforcing that system if they don't already have it, and it's encouraging it and even coercing businesses to adopt it or to promote it even further. And that's really what this is, I think, all about. This is about continuing. This is a part of the Great Reset, I believe. In order to have the Great Reset function, you need to have incentives for businesses to engage in this ESG system. And that's what this is. It's hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars every year in incentives for American businesses to adopt an ESG system.
Right. Yeah. I was going to say, what's a bigger incentive than the full weight of government spending? I mean, we know how big that is. That is much larger than your eye spending. So when these businesses that are trying to get the business of government, they're taking this into account way more than the needs or wants of any individual customer. So yeah, it's kind of straying away from just like a business caring about the individual and instead caring about this behemoth of a government.
That's right.
And yeah, it's just like, can we just talk about the MAO thing for 1 second here? Like, the agency is literally Made in America office. That wasn't some label that we slapped on it to be funny. They came up with it. Whose idea was this?
The thing that kills me about it too is the Made in America office. It could have been the Made in America department. That would have been NAD, which is not great, but not as bad as MAO, who killed tens of millions of people, or like 100 million people, or some crazy thing like that. I mean, that's a really, really bad choice. Some of you may remember when we did we've done a lot of stuff in the past on this thing called the LEAP Manifesto, which is kind of like a Green New Deal type thing that they did in Canada prior to the Green New Deal. We think the Green New Deal, a lot of the Green New Deal, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's version of it, came out of the LEAP Manifesto. And you and I we've laughed about that a million times. Why the heck would you call it the LEAP Manifesto? Like Great Leap Forward? Like that? You know, which is a horrible event in Chinese history, tied in with manifesto, like Communist Manifesto? Yeah, it's so stupid.
It's the only people that are writing manifestos are communists or like people that...
serial killers. Serial killers. They have manifestos too.
Yeah,
they love manifestos. It's such a weird choice.
The MAO agency,
right?
Like, and was it some intern that came up with that? That's like secretly like, oh, I'm going to get them for this.
Well, you said MAO agency. It is MAO agency, but they could have called it the Made in America agency, and that would have been MAA. Instead, they chose
very innocuous,
right? And in the world we live in today, where everything's an acronym, why wouldn't they
be like the first thought
of that? That's like the first thing that you think of. Right?
Could you imagine? And you know what? Like, you know, you and I are talking about it. I know, like, Glenn Beck's mentioned it, but like outside of that, nobody's given the Biden administration any hard time over this. Like, could you imagine the outrage if like the Trump administration came up with something where the acronym was like fascist or something like that? Like, they'd never hear the end of it. Like dog whistles, you know?
Right. Oh, of course. I mean, it's so weird.
Oh my God. It's hilarious.
It really is hilarious. I mean, we talk about this as part of the Great Reset. I mean, the Great Reset is another one of those things where it's just like, why would you ever call it the Great Reset? You know, we heard, we've mentioned this before offline. I don't think we've ever talked about this on the air, but There are sometimes when people who are Great Reset supporters refer to it as inclusive capitalism, and that is a way better way of tricking people into thinking that's a good idea.
Yeah.
Why would you ever choose Great Reset? Inclusive capitalism sounds great because you can be pro-capitalism and you're about inclusivity. Like everyone wants to be inclusive.
Right.
So why, but to call it the Great Reset, like, and then to say you're going to reset every aspect of society and every society must change and all of our social contracts need to change and all of that. It's like, no wonder why people are so terrified of it. Like, your name is stupid just in and of itself. We really don't even have to try that hard to convince people this is a scary thing because the name is so bad.
No, and we made a prediction before we even like publicly talked about the Great Reset that like once we hammer it enough times and whether once it gets enough traction, this concept of the Great Reset, they will run away from that term. So yeah, like I'll double down on that prediction. I'll say by the end of this year, they'll start referring to it as inclusive capitalism. They'll drop the whole Great Reset thing and they'll leave that to the conspiracy theory people on the right. But they came up with this term. They came up with the Made in America office. Like, we're just reporting the facts here, folks. So
it's amazing. It's amazing. It's so funny.
Anything else you want to say on this topic before we end this segment?
I think the most important thing to take away from this, and really anyone who's interested in the Great Reset just in general, is that you have to understand the way this thing is going to happen is in precisely this sort of way. It's all going to be through manipulation and cronyism and coercion, and it's not going to be some sort of big dramatic law like Obamacare was, where everyone was debating over Obama. You're never even going to hear about half of this stuff. It's going to be regulatory changes and stuff that happens behind the scenes, and stock markets are going to change their criteria for who is allowed to be listed on their stock exchanges. And you're going to wake up one day and you're not going to understand why the product or service or thing that you used to really love is gone or changed, or why your life is so different. It's going to be all happening behind the scenes and you're not really going to be a part of it. And so it's important to pay very close attention to the details, because the details are everything in this sort of in this topic in particular. The details are everything. They never come out and say what they really want to do. They only tell each other about it. That's it. In America anyway. I mean, the Davos people are very open about what they want. But in America, they are not. It's all about coded language, and it's all about executive orders that are vaguely worded. And so pay close attention to the details. That's where you're going to find the Great Reset, and we're already starting to see it with the MAO agency.
That's right. And we're going to pay attention to the details for you, too. So as long as you're staying up to date with our stuff, then you will be in the know when it comes to these plots. And you could do that by just going to stoppingsocialism.com. You could become a fan of ours on Facebook, Stopping Socialism. There's a Stopping Socialism TV where you'll see videos like these and more. On YouTube, Stopping Socialism TV. We were on Parler. Maybe someday we'll be back on Parler if Parler comes back into existence. We have 2 fans on Gab, so I don't know if we're going to try to get traction on that website.
I didn't even know we were on Gab.
We are on Gab. I picked that up just so we didn't miss out on the name. So yeah, follow us pretty much on any social media. Instagram, we're on that too, and Rumble, I think. So pretty much everything. So you can stay up to date with us in any way you see fit. Justin, where can the people find you?
At Justin T. Haskins on just about everything that you just mentioned.
All right, sounds good. All right, take care, everybody. We'll talk to you later.